motor.
Press this.
So sensory information is going to come along this pathway here. Okay, the posterior roots, made up of rootlets. The major pathway carrying somatosensory information is the posterior funiculus medial lemniscal pathway. There's 3 neurons in most of the sensory pathways. So the first order neuron comes in, goes up the posterior funiculus. Then it's synapses. Second neuron is always the one that crosses to the other side and goes up the medial lemniscal pathway to the thalamus. Synapse in the thalamus goes to the postcentral gyrus. Okay, so that's the posterior funiculus medial lemniscal pathway. So posterior funiculus tells you the pathway of the first neuron. Medial lemniscus tells you, second neuron. And it's always the third neuron from the thalamus to the postcentral gyrus. So if I cut the spinal cord halfway across, I would lose from the same side because it hasn't crossed yet. Okay, is that one okay?
It
crosses
only on the second part of the second neuron.
It synapses, then the second neuron crosses.
Okay.
And so that's called the posterior funiculus medial lemniscal pathway. And so you'd lose, if you cut halfway across, you'd lose from the same side. If you cut halfway across the spinal cord, in the area served by that spinal nerve, the dermatome. Now, the spinal thalamic pathway tells you the pathway of the second neuron in this other pathway. The neuron comes in and immediately synapses. And that neuron crosses to the other side and goes up, so spinal thalamic, spinal cord to thalamus. Nothing happening in the medulla. And synapses in, again, the thalamus that goes to the postcentral gyrus. So if I cut halfway across, I'm going to be losing from the opposite side because that's when it came in, synapse, and crossed to the other side. So if I cut in the spinal cord, I'll lose from the opposite side. And the lateral of that carries pain and temperature. The anterior carries things like itch and tickle and deep pressure, vibrations, things like that. Okay. Any question about those pathways?
Is synapses right away, you said?
Synapses right away, and then crosses. Okay. Now, the spinocerebellar pathway only has 2 neurons in it. It doesn't go through the thalamus, and it's carrying subconscious proprioception, as opposed to the posterior funiculus medial lemniscal pathway, which carries conscious proprioception, because you know what's happening in your muscles and joints. But there's also subconscious information just going directly to the cerebellum. That's 2 neurons. First one comes in, synapses either goes directly to the same side, or synapses goes across, moves up, and then goes back again. So it winds up on the same side. Okay?
Why does it sometimes cross and sometimes not?
I don't know. I didn't design it.
Look at you.
Happy
Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Happy Halloween. You've had some rough times, I see, huh?